So back in the 50s and 60s, America was really excited. Space was new territory, and nobody knew what was going on. It was kind of like the final frontier. It was the unknown, and you realize that we're doing things that nobody else has even attempted because they thought it wasn't possible.
In terms of breaking barriers, some of that stuff is written in blood, and that's easily seen here on Cape Canaveral.
11, this is Houston. You are go for TLI.
When we talk about going to Mars, or we talk about putting a man on the moon again, we're going to have to break other barriers to get there again.
Space. For decades, it's been an uncontested domain, hundreds of miles above the Earth's surface, the ultimate high ground. The United States Air Force has owned this high ground of space for decades. Other nations, other air forces only dream of making such a claim. But what if their dream became reality? Revisionist world powers have a new focus for their aggression. Their target? Space. They don't have to dominate it, just disrupt it. Millions feel the effects. Banks, airports, infrastructure. Our prosperity could be at risk. And so could this. And this. And them. It's clear. Space capabilities fuel our American way of life and our American way of war. Yesterday's thinking will not defeat tomorrow's challenges. It's time to evolve, to change the way we protect and defend our vital interests in space. Soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines will all be called to defend the ultimate high ground. We must increase our capacity and capabilities by partnering with our allies, other government partners, and industry. By collaborating, innovating, and integrating, our space capabilities will be resilient, a combat-ready part of the multi-domain warfighting network.
We got to launch. Stand by.
Data building. Zooming in on grid Whiskey Charlie 6. Check sources. Intel confirmed. Probable ASAT launch.
You have 2 for data release.
This is Sivers. ASAT launch from grid Whiskey Charlie 6. How copy?
Copy. ASAT launch. Initiating threat reaction.
Sir, I recommend a mission transfer from Spacecraft 4 to Spacecraft 6.
Any attack against our space capabilities
Execute.
will be met with a deliberate response.
Killing track 05877.
At a time, place, manner, and domain of our choosing. By working side by side, together.
Batteries release.
We'll compete, and we'll win.
In RU-12, we have good effects on the ground.
Ground forces are reporting the threat's been neutralized.
Revisionist world powers have a new focus for their aggression. Their target? Space. They don't have to dominate it, just disrupt it.
Yeah, very slick presentation, and I discussed what appears to be a new space race with RT's Nikki Erin earlier.
The US has just unveiled its latest plan to fit sensors to its satellites, and it's not just its own satellites it's going to be doing that to, it's also its allies' satellites. And as we know, satellites key for communication, navigation and intelligence these days, especially in the scenario of war. And the fear or reasoning is that potential adversaries of the US may be capable of hacking or even disabling these satellites. So by sharing its situational data with its allies, the idea is that this will deter any potential attacks. And it really is just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to spending in space, because in case you weren't aware, space warfare is the big defense trend right now. It's the new black. And if you don't want to take my word for it, here's the Air Force Secretary.
I cannot think of a military action that does not depend on space. Russia and China are developing capabilities to disable our satellites.
It seems like the big incentive for such a focus seems to be the capabilities of these potential adversaries with their own space programs. Of course, it's China and Russia. And there's this idea of a space war being promoted as something not too distinguishable from a video game. See if you can spot the difference between the actual Air Force Space Command promo video and a video game.
The United States Air Force has owned this high ground of space for decades. Other nations, other air forces only dream of making such a claim. But what if their dream became reality?
Never expect something you trust to turn against you.
Millions feel the effects. Banks, airports, infrastructure.
They left us open to full-scale invasion.
We'll compete, and we'll win.
I'm pretty lucky that you put the strappers on the screen there, because I wouldn't have been able to distinguish between the video game and what is now reality by the US Air Force. What's the big grand plan here?
Well, they're pouring billions into this new space technology, roping in space whiz kids such as SpaceX's Elon Musk, who can show that he can not only deliver, he can do it quickly. You know, no need to wait around years and years for a prototype any longer. And while the jamming of satellites is one concern, the question now is, you know, when are we going to see, or how long is it before we see actual physical attacks in outer space? And some reports say this is already a possibility. In fact, speaking in February, the US Air Force Chief of Staff said that it was just a matter of years before we're going to see American forces fighting from space. Now, regardless of whether this is the case or not, the US is definitely determined to be a leader in this field.
The character of warfare has changed. We envision a constellation of nanosatellites, always the predator, never the prey.
And in his own inimitable way, the President of the United States also expressed his excitement at the militarization of space.
Space is a warfighting domain, just like the land, air, and sea. We may even have a space force, develop another one. Space Force. We have the Air Force, we'll have the Space Force. We have the Army, the Navy. As
things seem to be steaming ahead at record speed here, and you know, people might be wondering why there are no laws or resolutions to draw a line, and you know how far people can take this whole space wars idea. Well, actually, there is. Almost a decade ago, there were 178 countries that voted on a UN resolution to prevent a space arms race. There were only 2 countries that abstained. It was the US and Israel. Also, Washington blocked a joint Russian-Chinese effort to ban all weapons in space. So perhaps an inkling there, almost a decade ago, that the US had designs on the militarization of space and was perhaps already, as you said, staking its claim to the stars.
Vital U.S. infrastructure, including the power grid, under cyber threat by Russian government hackers, potentially giving the Kremlin the ability to turn off the lights. The Department of Homeland Security and the FBI detailing a 2-year multi-stage effort by Moscow targeting the U.S. energy grid. The hackers first gained access to small energy-related companies, planting malware that allowed them to move into larger networks. Once inside the energy suppliers, the Russians collected information on the facility's control systems, attempting to acquire the ability to turn those systems off.
They're identifying targets They're positioning malware so they could pull the trigger when they wanted to. But they're also sending the United States a message. We are in position to cause harm if we wanted to do it. And so the U.S., should be a little more careful.
The Russians targeted other crucial sectors as well, including nuclear power, water, aviation, and manufacturing. Experts see the intrusion as a possible precursor to an unprecedented Russian cyber attack that could, in the event of war, devastate the U.S.
This project will accommodate somewhere between 6,000 and 10,000 people when it's completed. It's a city. It's going to be the largest survival community on the planet. The whole world is concerned. Everybody has gut level feelings, and they're all feeling something's about to happen. So our buyers are people that are aware. They're not paranoid, they're aware.
Meet Satan, as NATO's come to call this, the R-36M, 209 tons of nuclear Armageddon. It is a paradox. If these things ever launched in anger, it'll likely mean the end of human civilization. And yet, it is that very fact that guarantees that no sane man will ever press the red button.
We're traveling inside eastern Syria on an exclusive trip with U.S. Special Forces. General Jonathan Braga tells us this rural terrain was ISIS's heartland and that the extremists have been driven way back. But now there are fears the U.S. could end up in a direct conflict with new adversaries, Russians. We drove to the Conoco oil and gas refinery, now a U.S. base. It's the first time reporters have been here since American troops came under attack on this spot last month by 500 fighters, including Russian mercenaries, an international incident shrouded in secrecy until now.
So on that night, we started receiving artillery rounds in around right where you're standing, upwards of 30 different artillery rounds.
General Braga says he immediately picked up a hotline to the Russian military.
So you called and said, stop this?
Yes, I did.
What response did you get?
Those are not our forces.
U.S. forces were unconvinced. Braga says they gathered in this building to launch a counterstrike, raining down artillery and airstrikes.
200 to 300 of the Russian force was killed. Is that accurate?
Oh, and that's, I would say, close to our estimates as well.
Were you worried that this could have become some sort of real war with Russia?
Well, absolutely concerned.
U.S. military officials tell NBC News the Russian mercenaries were from the Wagner Group, a shadowy security firm linked to Yevgeny Prigozhin, a powerful oligarch known as Putin's chef. The U.S. captured intercepts of the mercenaries' communications, complaining about their heavy losses. They tore us to pieces, put us through hell, said one. The Yankees made their point, and it seems the mercenaries haven't given up. General Braga took us to the edge of the base, pointing out to where similar forces have come back.
Hope it doesn't happen again, but if it does, we'll be ready.